All right, Chris Peaks back here with Brandon Mosley for our BCS State of Alabama podcast, and we got GOP Senate hopeful Morgan Murphy with us here today. Mr. Murphy, I think you was a press secretary for the Pentagon in President Trump's first term. In the recent actions this week, what's going on in the Pentagon in its case when stuff like this happens?
Well, we restored confidence to the Department of War. When I was there as press secretary and Trump won, actually, one of my bosses was Kash Patel, and he would sign his emails Department of War. And in fact, one of the reporters, Barbara Starr, got a hold of one of his emails and absolutely lost her mind over, oh my gosh, are we going to the Department of War? What does that mean? Well, from Cash's perspective, that's what the department is supposed to do. And I think that's exemplified by the operations that Pete Hegseth has overseen there at the department. We saw Venezuela, and that was a master class in coordination, a absolute brilliant display of American firepower. It made the Chinese hardware. They're defending Venezuela. They got much of their air defenses from China, much of it from Russia, made that stuff look like it was purchased off of Temu. I mean, we absolutely obliterated their defenses. And now you see the same thing going on with Iran. We've cut through Chinese air defenses there and the Iranian drone system and the Russian Su-400, which is a very capable system, but no match for the United States of America. So what I'm saying is what Trump's administrations, both one and two, have done is turned a defensive department that was busy navel gazing most of the time into an offensive department that is adept at actually engaging what the American people pay us to do, and that is war.
Yeah, it's been amazing for 3 days because I remember back during Desert Storm, the first few strikes were by F-117s trying to get in there and take out their air defenses.
Right.
We were all over um, Iran. I mean, we've thrown 1,000 sorties here in these first 3 days because I guess our stealth aircraft are just completely invisible, apparently, to the Iranians.
Well, I haven't received a briefing. I'm no longer receiving classified briefings now that I'm running for Senate. But knowing, what I know about our tactics and procedures, we overwhelmed their air defenses, both with satellites, I think with false flags. Then we sent in a barrage of unmanned systems, drones, and of course, the ever faithful and dependable Tomahawk missile. This could be launched from any number one of our armada that were stationed there in the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz, and of course up near Israel there. And so, I would say that what the United States has demonstrated is an ability. A lot of people said, oh, well, you're busy attacking. For the past 20 years, the United States has just been attacking countries that don't have air forces. Well, that may be true, but it's also naive to think that we haven't sharpened our blade when it comes to countries that do have significant air forces and air assets and anti-air assets like Iran. Iran is no soft target. It is a nation of 90 million people. And so I think our enemies are taking note. I mean, if I were, Kim Jong-un at the moment, I'd be a little jittery.
How far do you see this going? Do you see us actually putting boots on the ground, or at least special operations or CIA in there to help topple the government?
No, and I don't think. I mean, I can't speak for the administration, but I think the president's been very clear about what he expects from Iran, and he's been very clear at the negotiating table with them. He had two masterful negotiators there, and Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, his son-in-law. But the president said last night, he said, "Look, we negotiated one thing, then they reneged on it. They negotiated another thing, then they reneged on." He said, "These are not people we can do business with. Take them out." So I think his stated goal there, if you read between the lines, would take out the leadership. He doesn't want to get into I think the Bush doctrine of we're exporting democracy through the barrel of a rifle is not what the president's seeking here.
How much money have we spent to the Iranian regime or their little subsidiary client guys in Lebanon getting hostages back?
Oh gosh.
Over
Well, I mean, if you look at what the
decades.
Biden administration and before that, the Obama administration inked over a deal that basically sent $56 billion to Iran. Now, my liberal friends will get all technical on that and say, well, that was allowing them to sell oil on the open market and et cetera, blah, blah, blah. And it was for humanitarian purposes. And I said, do you need to be hit in the head with a tomahawk to figure this out? Because they were spending that $56 billion to develop the drone systems that threaten us. I mean, Marco Rubio predicted this 11 years ago. You can go back um, on YouTube and see his speech from the Senate floor 11 years ago saying that he wanted to be on record that giving $56 billion for Iran to drop its nuclear weapon ambitions, which never happened, by the way, but giving $56 billion to Iran to do that would embolden them to develop missiles to hit our ships, to develop missiles to hit long range missiles to hit our allies and partners up to and including us. That's what the president was so concerned about, was that Iran was developing ballistic missiles capable of reaching citizens here in the United States. And he said, no more. We're not going to do that. So you hit on something that's really important with the president's strategy. When he took office, China was buying about 2 million barrels of oil a day from Iran. China, as you know, imports most of its oil. They are not a significant oil producing nation, so they imported about half of their oil from Iran and Venezuela. So when Trump took office, they were importing, as I said, about 2 million barrels of oil a day from Iran. And as of Friday, he had cut that down to 1.25 million barrels of oil a day. I can't do math that fast off the top of my head, but that's, in the order of 30 or 40% drop. And he did that through tariffs. But they were still what the bigger play here is that China was getting oil on the cheap. So they were able to buy discounted oil from Venezuela, from Iran, because Iran and Venezuela were blackballed in the SWIFT market. That is, in dollars. They were not valuing their oil in dollars and selling it on the open market in dollars. And Trump has put a stop to that.
Mr. Murphy, you mentioned North Korea a while ago. Do you think that Cuba could be in those crosshairs as well?
Cuba is a longtime enemy of the United States. And I think that what the policy of this administration has been to cut Cuba off and not be soft on Cuba. And of all people, our Secretary of State, probably the most powerful Secretary of State in at least 30 years, is no friend of Cuba. Marco Rubio is a blood enemy of Cuba, and he knows just how evil the regime has been. And we've looked the other way. The United States has looked the other way for several decades. And most recently looked the other way where they were using some kind of electromagnetic weapon to injure our folks at the State Department there. They called it Havana syndrome, where people were vomiting and had traumatic brain injury for unexplained reasons. So I think at the very minimum, what I can say to you is that Cuba was entirely dependent on Venezuela for revenue. So Cuba has been basically a vassal state of Venezuela for the better part of 30 years. So since the Soviet Union collapsed in 91 and stopped sending support and aid to Cuba, basically that mantle has been taken up by Venezuela. So by taking out Maduro and cutting off the knees of their oil revenues flowing to all of our illicit enemies, they really are, I think, taking a deep crack at Cuba at the same time. It's kind of a twofer for the United States.
Mr. Murphy, in the American Revolution, I think we fought for what, 6, 7, 8 years to get independence from Britain. But the colonies, they all had their own little militias. George Washington was a veteran of, French and Indian War. Um, and, the American citizenry was by and large armed. Um, the Iranian people lost 35,000 in just the last 2 months from protests. I know we want them to take over the government, but I mean,
How?
we saw what 35,000 people do against Kalashnikovs, and it's not pretty.
No, no, you're absolutely right, and that it's a strong defense for the Second Amendment, and we have a First Amendment, freedom of press, what we're doing right now, and we have a Second Amendment in case the freedoms guaranteed by the First are ever threatened. And the Iranian people, I think, many times over the past 47 years have probably wished they had a Second Amendment right like we have, and it's this is a tough call. This is not going to be easy for the administration. It's a risky gambit, and a lot of times, a determined minority. And I'm hearing that the vast majority of Iranians want to topple their government, and it's kind of clear with the protests they've had. It does seem that way that the hardliners are a distinct minority, but a distinct minority can take over a country. We saw that with the Bolsheviks. I mean, 15%, I guess, of Russia was able to enslave the world's largest country for, the better part of 70 years. So it is with some caution. I think you raise a good point that it may be very difficult for the people of Iran to rise up against their leaders. However, I don't think that's the express goal of the Trump administration. He wants the people in charge of Iran, whomever they may be, to give up their quest for weapons of mass destruction, to give up their quest for intercontinental ballistic missiles, to stop their proxies throughout the Middle East from sowing discord. And whoever is in that seat, I think, is probably taking a harder look at Trump's terms today. He killed the Ayatollah Khomeini on Saturday morning. He killed the Ayatollah's replacement this morning. So if you're the next guy looking to take that seat, I bet you're going to say, well, what is it that Trump wants exactly? How can we negotiate? How can we find a path to peace here?
Mr. Murphy, kind of shifting gears here.
Mhm.
One of our greatest threats that I've learned from former Congressman Mo Brooks interviewing him is our national debt. We are now currently paying more on the interest than what we are on national defense. How do we get this under control before we become insolvent?
Well, I'm a deficit hawk, and I agree with Congressman Brooks, former Congressman Brooks, on this 100,000%. No debtor nation can ever stay in power for an extended period of time. So I think the president is right on tariffs, and I think tariffs are proving to be one, lucrative to the Treasury without being a drag on the economy. The president has a real estate developer from Queens, right, who likes gold-plated bathroom fixtures and supermodels, has out-predicted 34 Nobel laureate economists, and they hate him for it. But his logic is sound, and his position is one I really admire. If you'll allow me to get nerdy for just a minute, it's a key passion point of mine. Manufacturing is the key to a nation's strength. The thing I like behind my head, make America great again. The key word there, I think, is make. I love that word. A nation that cannot make its own armaments, a nation that cannot make its own tools of self-defense, won't be a sovereign nation very long. Adam Smith said it in The Wealth of Nations. He said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, it's not a good idea to let your enemy make your sailcloth and your gunpowder. And today, that equivalent is probably titanium, sponge, and microprocessors, which we let our enemy make. And Trump said, no, we need to, one, reshore manufacturing, two, level the playing field when it comes to tariffs. The United States basically has been stuck in a post-Bretton Woods environment since the end of World War II, when Europe was flattened and Asia was a smoldering ruin, the United States did have generous trade terms with all of our trading partners because they were bust. But today, 85 years later, they're no longer bust. And so the tariff regime that we had in place was dramatically unfair. And the president just called it like it is. And all of that is to say that if we reshore manufacturing and we level out the playing field when it comes to trade, then we're going to start paying down our debt. And Scott Bessent, our Treasury Secretary, is so good at this. And he says we're going to do this. We're going to pay down the debt through three mechanisms. One, we don't have a revenue problem in this country. We have a spending problem. So we're going to control spending. And the Trump administration is doing that. And two, he said we're gonna increase manufacturing, and three, we're going to use tariffs. And so in just 1 year, in just his first year in office, Trump has reduced the annual deficit, not the overall deficit, but just the annual deficit, the amount by which we're going in the hole, by 20%. And that to me is an encouraging start. I hope we'll see it accelerate.
Along that same lines, is we reshore manufacturing, and as you don't like to take money out of people's pockets, but if we make it a little bit harder for Americans that are able-bodied and able to work to get off of government benefits and to take those manufacturing jobs, and people that are barely in the economy, like working a part-time gig, 3 days a week, and get them full-time employment, can't we, over time, as we spend less on benefits and people that are costing us money end up in the payroll, making money, paying taxes, and buying more stuff, and thus growing the economy? We can sort of, if we can accomplish all that other, like by increasing the workforce participation rate, we can grow our way out of the deficit.
Yeah, bingo. I mean, that's it. Growth is really the key to accelerating our way out of the deficit. And you hit the nail on the head. It's workforce participation. And the state with one of the worst workforce participation rates in the country is our home state. And I hate that. But there are ways. I think Tommy Tuberville is going to come in here, and you're going to see this state turn around. One, I think that Tuberville, having worked for Tommy Tuberville, I was his national security advisor, and I love Coach and know him pretty well. I think he's going to go after fraud in a major way. And we're, watching what the events unfolding in Minnesota, right? We saw the fraud, the Somali pirates writ large here in our own country. They were ripping off the taxpayer left, right, and center. But we've got it going on here in Alabama, too. We have a huge SNAP program that has got a terrible amount of fraud on it and just took off right after COVID. And so I expect that the incoming governor will take a hard line on that, and he'll want to increase the workforce participation rate. And this is the first time, this year is the first time since Trump's first term that we saw wages rising faster than inflation. People don't want to work for free. And the key to getting people into the workforce is paying them a wage that's competitive and motivates them to work. And I don't blame young people. They're ticked off because they're like, what, I'm going to work this gig economy. I'm going to drive an Uber. I'm going to work at Starbucks. I'm not going to have a dependable job, a salary that I can count on. And, the average house in America right now, the average house price in America is $420,000. So if you're like 22 years old, just starting out thinking, how in the world am I ever going to afford $420,000 for a house? And they're right, and they're frustrated, and they're turning to, sadly, what grieves me is to watch young people be indoctrinated by these communists like Mandami, who say, oh, well, we'll give you a free grocery store, and we'll give you free rides on buses, and we'll give you free health care, and they believe it. And so I think the president is offering a clear and realistic alternative, saying, no, what we're going to do is bring back manufacturing. And we're going to bring back a living wage to this country. And we're going to make sure your wages are rising faster than inflation. We're actually seeing something under this president that I've not really seen in my lifetime, and that's deflation. He's bringing down the cost of gasoline at the pump, now many places under $2. He's bringing down the cost of groceries. I had sticker shock just going to, the Piggly Wiggly. So it's remarkable that the president just does what works, and that's what I'm fighting for. Because here in Alabama, when I was born, I'm sitting here on Red Mountain in Birmingham, Alabama, and when I was born, Birmingham was a steel town, and it lost 66,000 jobs, and before I was age 10 in the steel industry, and that's 66,000 jobs that never came back. And that had a ripple effect throughout the entire economy here in, north central Alabama. But the same story kept happening. It wasn't just steel. So in Andalusia, Alabama, the Altex factory that made a lot of, nice shirt collars. My dad used to buy the extras down there, closed up. The sock company, Russell Athletics, in Alexander City shuttered down. And it's the same. There are textile mills almost in every small town from Albertville to Opp, and they all got closed down in the 80s because of Korean unfair price undercutting. So the Japanese took our steel and the Koreans took our textiles, and most politicians just shrugged and said, that's okay. I'm not going to shrug about it. Donald Trump isn't shrugging about it. He's fighting for manufacturing. He's fighting for industry. And Alabama really, since the 90s, has led the way in reshoring manufacturing. We brought back Mercedes in 1994. I wrote an article about it for Forbes magazine at the time, said it was a good idea. And today, I got roundly criticized for that, actually. I almost didn't get it published. The editor of Forbes didn't want to run it because Alabama had given a tax break to Mercedes of $250 million to get them here. But today, just Mercedes and its associated suppliers. I'm not counting Honda and ThyssenKrupp and Airbus and Blue Origin and all the great companies that have moved to Alabama since Mercedes. But just Mercedes and its associated suppliers brought $892 million in tax revenue into the state coffers last year. That's incredible. That's almost a fourfold return on our investment in just 1 year. So it's been incredible to see what manufacturing can do for our state. It can do that for the nation too.
Mr. Murphy, it's interesting you said that about Scott Bassett talking about we have a spending problem. I've been telling people that often. We never hear about Doge anymore. Are they still operating, and were they not
Yeah.
aggressive enough as far as cutting out waste, fraud, and abuse?
Well, Doge is still operating, and it's still seeking. It doesn't have the high visibility leader that it had in the beginning, but it's still very much going on within the government. And as you may have caught during the State of the Union, the president put J.D. Vance in charge of fraud, and that was one of the biggest things that Doge was going after was fraud. So I expect that Vance will be using Doge and AI to seek out fraud, and there's plenty of it in our government. Seek out fraud. The problem with our government that is, when you spend $7 trillion, that's almost humanly impossible to track it all. There are just too many hidey holes for people to put money into and hide away. And so the real thing we've got to do as Republicans is cut the size of government. And Trump is doing that. He's cut 50,000 people out of the workforce this year. This is the smallest federal workforce we've had in something like 80 years on a per capita basis. And it's incredible because he's still growing the economy. So federal spending is included. I hate GDP. Because federal spending is included in that. So when Biden just went on a spending spree and jacked federal spending, just borrowed all the money and had the Treasury pay for it and jacked federal spending through the roof. It counted as GDP growth, and he was real proud of that GDP. That's not real growth. That's just a sugar high, and when you come crashing down off of that, you've got to pay it all back. And so Trump has been able to cut the federal workforce by 50,000 people, and still in this first quarter grow the number of employed Americans at a great rate. So unemployment's headed way down under 4%. So that's something I think Bessent should be really proud of as our most competent Treasury Secretary in at least 20 years.
In Minnesota, we saw where federal dollars were going for programs that I think all of us would support. Oh, daycares and, you know, aged, dementia patient care and, just really nice sounding things. And then we found out, these nonprofit companies who were supposed to be serving all these people actually didn't have any clients. They just, cashed the checks, put it whatever numbers they wanted on the form that to go to draw as much federal dollars down as possible. And the money, a bunch of it went to Somalia, and a lot of it we probably no idea where it is. How does the Congress or the president track down? I mean, we know about Minnesota because there was an investigative journalist who just, grabbed this issue and just started going to all these places. I mean, I haven't thought about doing that here in Alabama, but, theoretically, the same thing could be happening, especially in a blue state that's trying to draw as many, programs and dollars as they can. How do you get all that fraud and abuse out of the system?
It's tough, and it's tough the way we've designed the system, and with the media. I mean, you hit on something a little bit. The media is at the back of the Democrats, and I say that I worked in the media for 30 years. I began my career at the New York Post in 1994. Journalism has a terrible name right now. It's been given a horrible reputation, but it's essential, and we often call the media the fourth estate, the fourth branch of government, because the media is essential to checking our elected leaders. And that's something I will pledge to do as an elected official, is talk to the media and be open and transparent with the media and give the media access it needs to do the story. But unfortunately, our media has been hijacked by a bunch of ideologues. The media is absolutely in the tank for the American left. And it's unfair. I taught journalism ethics at the University of Alabama, graduate level course, and I would fail any student that didn't talk to the other side. Like if you did a story and you didn't present something that was fair and balanced, I would give you an F. Well, yesterday morning, Apple News, that's the aggregate system aggregate news site that's on most people's phones. They just it just pops up. Apple pushes it to you. Apple News had 19 stories on Iran, and not one of them came from a right or center right media outlet. The same with Google. Google had 19 stories on Iran, same number coincidentally, and none of them, zero, came from a right or center right outlet. Same with Yahoo News, same with MSN News. So the news is just completely, right now, the mainstream news is completely biased. And so what happens as you point out, like Minnesota, well, we give something a nice name. We give it like, daycare centers or, elderly hospice or whatever it is. It sounds great. And the media is not doing their job. It took like a 22-year-old kid to go in there with his cell phone and actually blow the doors off of this whole story. They should be ashamed of themselves. I mean, the Minneapolis Star and other legacy outlets there should be ashamed of their reporting that all of this was happening right under their nose. But that's the thing about the left, and it's the thing that people are susceptible to and need to be aware of, is just the name on it can be completely deceptive. So if somebody calls themselves an anti-fascist, well, I look at their tactics and look at what they're doing. They love government and they want the government to control everything. They look pretty fascist to me. And if they say they're an anti-racist, Well, look at their policies. They want to judge everybody on the color of their skin or their gender. They look pretty racist to me. And so the nomenclature doesn't matter. Just look at what they're doing. We need the media to get in there and look at what people are doing.
It's interesting you said that, because I often point out the people who are for DEI, you're the ones that the racists because you're wanting people to be promoted on that. Do you
It's
think that
major
now,
gaslighting, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, totally.
Yeah.
Do you think that that is gone or is that going to continue just popping back up, people pushing these DEI
Well, what they're going
programs?
to do is what they always do, and they're just going to rename it, right? They're going to, DEI is now a toxic name, and so now they're calling it something else, and it'll sound, plausible. And if you're, for the administrators at the colleges and the executive boards, I mean, what I would say to board members and people who are notionally in charge but used to going to board meetings and just signing off on stuff, watch out. Watch out. Read what's happening. Look at what your human resources department. I mean, like we've just named everything. That's why I love going back to the Department of War. Like it used to be, we used to call it personnel, right? Then it became the human resources HR
Yeah.
department, right? And it's just say what it is. But the left doesn't ever just want to be direct and say what it is. And we need to just start calling a spade to get after this stuff. But you're right. We got to root it out no matter what it's called.
Mr. Murphy, in your campaign for Senate, this is the first time you've run. You're running against an attorney general who's had two statewide campaigns, a sitting congressman, who's run, I don't know, two times for a state house and four times, for
Yeah.
Congress. How do you get your name out there to a public that hasn't, that never voted for Morgan Murphy before?
Yeah, right. And so it's hard. A lot of people say, "Gosh, like you're running for office, and you're not going to be able to compete with these two longtime politicians." And they're going to have, people in Washington watch, or political junkies watch two things really in a race, any race, whether you're running for, a deputy undersecretary dog catcher or you're running for U.S. Senate. Politicos look at two things. One, they follow the money, and two, they look at, media. And those are what we call in business leading indicators, and trailing indicators are polls. So if you get the money and you get the media, the polls will follow. So in our case here in the Senate race, in his first quarter in the race, our attorney general raised about $400,000 in his first quarter in the race. Our representative from the Wiregrass raised about $519,000 in his first quarter in the race. In my first quarter in the race, never run before, didn't take a dime of special interest, raised over $1 million. And really proud of that because I'm just an ordinary citizen. I'm a Navy captain, Navy vet. Didn't take a dime of special interest money, but outraised a couple of longtime guys that have been at this a lot longer than I have. So that's how I compete, is raising the money so I can raise awareness.
Mr. Murphy, along those same lines, I mean, it's a very crowded Senate race, and I didn't realize I think there's 7 people in it. What qualities do you think that you possess that separates yourself from the others?
Yeah, it is a crowded race, and that's what you can expect with an open Senate seat. And I'm proud that a lot of people are stepping up. I think it's good that Alabama has choices in the race. But what I bring is experience. So if you want to play in the NBA, it's probably good to have bounced a basketball before. I have been in Washington. Now I've never run for elected office before, but I've certainly worked in Washington. I was a magazine editor for years until I got fed up with what was going on in DC and went to work for President Trump in his first administration. President Trump is the first politician I've ever worked for. President Trump is the first politician I've ever donated to. I'm the only one in this Alabama Senate race that has stroked a check from my personal account to the president. That you can just go look in the FEC filings and see that. But that's why I went to Washington initially. Kash Patel told me, Morgan, you got to stay here and fight. And so I did. I went to work with Tommy Tuberville, worked as his national security advisor, then worked for the president again, had the honor of working at the White House here the last 9 months from, when President took office till when I got out to enter this race. So I have the experience. I'm from Alabama, but I've got the experience in DC. And when you go to Washington, everybody wants to send. I mean, we all want to send someone to Washington that, like Mr. Smith, and I get that. But Washington is the most prosperous and powerful capital in the history of the world, and politics is in DC is the most cutthroat and difficult politics in, I think, the history of the world. So you send a novice up there, someone who's never been there. They're going to get eaten alive, and it's a complicated place. So I've got the experience, and I've also got the track record. If you like what Tommy Tuberville is doing in Washington, D.C., and you like what Donald Trump is doing in Washington, D.C., you'll like what Morgan Murphy will do in Washington, D.C., because I wrote policy for both of those men. And you can go and look, even though I'm not a politician, you can look at my track record. I've been writing for 30 years, all the way back to that article I mentioned in Forbes magazine in 1998 about policy issues. If you want to know where I stand on war and the funding of our defense department and and where I stand on Israel and where I stand on manufacturing. Well, these are all subject. I've written hundreds of articles. You can come to my website, murphyforsenate.com, get a link to a lot of them. I'm on the record in most cases.
Mr. Murphy, we've had you on for over 45 minutes. I mean, me and Christopher can ask questions all day.
Yeah.
But is there anything you would like to touch on before we leave?
Well, I think the most important thing is, I'd ask for people to make an informed vote. So if you're there and you're weighing this Senate seat, take a look. I encourage you to go to my website, take a look at the issues I've laid out. I launched this campaign with a full plank of issues. I'm the only candidate to have done that. I'm also the only candidate to have gotten endorsements from all 67 counties. So I've been veteran endorsed by over 100 veterans from all 67 of Alabama's counties. And I would hope that the voters would go, and the Senate is such an important place. We only have 2 senators, and to fight effectively in the United States Senate, you've either got to be there for 3 terms or 18 years. That's kind of the way most senators become effective, is just get seniority. Or you really have to know what you're doing. And I'm a fan of term limits, so I'd like to see less fossils walking around the Senate and more people with action and gumption. So I'd ask the voters to go take a look at that, read some of what I've got to say, and if it strikes your interest, I'd appreciate your vote on May 19th.
Thank you very much for coming on, Mr. Murphy.
Hey, great to be with you. Thank you. Y'all have a great afternoon.
Yes, sir. You too.
Thanks for being
Bye-bye.
on.
Thank you.